So thrilled to bits to see all of you. I know a few of you, a few friends, a few colleagues, yeah, and some that I haven't worked with. So I hope that this session is going to be really helpful to you. I hope it's going to be fun as well. Just to explain that, you know, when I first agreed to do it, it was going to be for 24 people, and we were going to make it very experiential. And then, as Stefan said, you know, Per offered to, you know, he said there's, you know, a few people want to join. I was thinking 5 or 6, you know, and then the floodgates opened. So my chance of turning this into a really experiential session is quite reduced, obviously, with this number. Somebody can't hear, Stefan, you know, I hope it'll work out. I hope it'll work out, and in terms of how we're planning to do it. So big thank you to Per, who sadly couldn't be here today, but I'm hoping he's listening in. Big thank you to Stefan for stepping in, and for Carol, and everybody on Friends of Bangor. I do think they've done an extraordinary job. You know, I really do take my hat off to all that you've done on Friends of Bangor. It's just superb. I don't think we ever imagined it would be as lively and active as this. So it's wonderful. I also want to thank all my group teachers, and I'm just aware, you know, so many people I've learned from, so many students I've learned from, and so many. I have 2 particular teachers that I'd like to mention. One is Jodie Mardula, that some of you will know well, I don't think she is listening, but I shall play her a bit of this so that she hears me mention her name. But I learned a huge amount from her. And somebody else called Francis Batten, that I don't know if any of you came across, but he died some years ago. He was an absolutely superb group work trainer and teacher. So I think these people are very precious to us, aren't they? The people that we learn from. So let's just start with a settling practice. Just inviting you to come in and yeah, just come in and settle into wherever you're sitting. So just coming into a sense of your feet on the floor, or your legs perhaps on the floor if you're sitting on a cushion or a stool. Coming in directly to just feeling all the points of contact. Between your body and what it's touching. So the seat, the floor, the carpet perhaps. So just coming to arrive, coming to settle. With a real sense of the weight of you going down. Gravity pulling us closer to the floor and the ground, and ultimately the earth beneath us. So I hope we'll have time for lots of short practices during this session. So just tell you a little bit just give you a little bit of a taste about what we're going to be doing. So as Stefan mentioned, I've really worked with groups since my 20s, and that's now an awful long time, a hugely long time. And I'm just constantly fascinated by them, and I have a great sense. I used to be in community development, so I have a strong sense really of the potential of groups to transform, to empower, and certainly to enable us to learn. So I want to, in this session, just really offer us an opportunity to have a taste of all this sort of group stuff, this group work, and really to be all the time cultivating this sense of this other entity in the room, this other entity on the screen. So perhaps while I'm introducing this, you might want to just scroll across the screen. I think we now have, how many? We have 6, we have 5, we have 5 screens, or perhaps less than that if you're on full screen. Just scrolling across, not so much to see the names that you might recognize, but perhaps just to notice the faces, just to notice the eyes looking back at you into the screen. Just to notice that here are a group of, there are 95 of us all together, a group of 95 teachers, people interested, people engaging. Some of you I know are just starting out on your teaching training. Some of you I'm sure have been teaching for some length of time. This is our group. This is this entity that has its own sort of character. I mean, less so online, but I think you'll find as we move on, there will be some sense of character, some sense of patterns. I hope so. So it's really interesting that we've all got loads of experience with groups. I mean, that's an obvious thing to say. Lots of experience. We started in a group as a family. We then had groups at school, friendship groups, work groups, colleagues, interest groups, lots of different groups. We had perhaps campaigning groups, political groups. And many of you, I'm sure, will also have a lot of experience of group work. So this idea of, working with groups, working with this medium of groups. And so, you may find that some of what I'm going to speak about will be very familiar to you. It'll be sort of baby stuff, really. But just seeing if you can approach it with new eyes, new interest, and hopefully there'll be some little tastes in amongst that will be new to you, and perhaps might be something that you can use in the future. So I just was, as I was preparing this talk and this session, I was thinking of all the groups that I'd been in, and I kind of or not been in, but I'd led or I'd facilitated. So I thought I'd give you a little taste of those. So a long time ago, I was involved in a newly arrived group of Ugandan Asian women when Idi Amin chucked people out of Uganda, and they came over to this country. I've worked quite a bit with couples preparing for childbirth. I've worked with mothers of under 5s who were at risk of their children coming into care. I've worked with young people and issues around safer sex. That was interesting. I've worked with council tenants in high-rise flats. I've worked with rural African women strongly affected by HIV and HIV/AIDS and poverty. I've worked a lot with people with cancer. And I've worked with hospice workers and mental health workers, and particularly the group I'm thinking about is the healthcare assistants in hospice. So most of the groups that I've worked with, or many of them, share some element of being marginalized. And I think this is quite interesting to me, and I guess it's one of the reasons why I'm so engaged with this work. So marginalized, many of them through poverty, many of them through ill health. Many of them through gender. Women's groups are more. I've worked with more women's groups than any other, I guess, and also with race and diversity. So it's interesting that the group context was key to what the group members learnt, the actual context, the purpose that brought them together. But the process, the how, was really all about the gaining of some sense of personal agency and some sort of sense of collective empowerment, some sense of community. That was huge, and it is still huge, absolutely huge. And I'm very aware that mindfulness offers a very important and unique resource to this work of personal agency, of collective community. And it's one of the reasons I'm so interested engage with this work. So this session could have been called Connecting to a Sense of Common Humanity. I love that phrase. It's a phrase that we're using much more now, aren't we, during lockdown, this sense of common humanity. And I'm sure that many of us have seen pictures on the television of high-rise flats in Wuhan with people calling out to each other. You know, people singing. I mean, those wonderful pictures and sounds of opera singers from balconies in Italy. And in Bergamo, which is where I was actually less than 2 years ago, I was teaching there. So there's this sense of common humanity which somehow is closer to us now during this really difficult time of the virus. And I just want to sort of hold that in mind as a sort of background sound to us as we go through some aspects to this work. I would ask, in addition to some of the things that Stefan mentioned, I would ask if you can bear it to show your video, to actually be visible to the group. I know that's a drag because it's quite nice to turn the video off and do something else when it sounds like I'm getting boring, which probably will be quite often. But this is about group. And I think it's really important for us to show up into this space of group. But obviously, if you don't want to, then that's entirely your business. We're going to do quite a lot of breakout rooms, and you'll find that they'll be reasonably brief. So we'll kind of move into a breakout room, and then you'll have a question that you'll take in, and then you'll come out and probably share in a number of different ways, very, very briefly, just little tastes, because there are so many of us here. So just to say to you that it's really important in your breakout room to really hold a sense of confidentiality. So not to share in any sense perhaps something personal that somebody told you in the breakout room. So I'd really ask you to respect that. So when you come out, just really being careful what you share. And, you know, when you're talking about this to anybody else, to a friend or a partner or whatever, don't be sharing what other people have told you, because it could well be personal. Okay. So I'm now going to share my screen. I'm going to share with you a little bit of the outline of this session, really. So here we are, and we start off with the name of the session, Groups in Mindfulness-Based Teaching, and this model that's going to come up quite often, which is called the Inside Out Group Model. It's got a rather kind of ugly, clumsy title called IOG, or IOG model, which I'm not sure whether Gemma or I thought that up, but I think we could have done better. But anyway, it is. It's the Inside Out Group Model. And really, all of what I say is going to relate to this, but not really in the format that you can see it there. So let's come into, so what is this session going to be all about? Well, there's an introduction, which we're doing at the moment, but then we're going to look in some detail at the forming the circle. My theory is that if the group is well formed, it really in some ways manages pretty well. So the forming of the circle is all about facilitating the conditions that the group needs to form, to become a group, actually, to become a group. Then we're going to look at group membership, which has two aspects. So this is very much understanding what participants bring into the group, into the mindfulness-based group, understanding what they bring in and the influence this has. And also the sharing, the kind of normalizing that can happen, sharing a sense of similar experience, which is very powerful. And this is the common humanity that I spoke about. And then something about leadership. We're just going to touch into this and very much looking at how we can hold and befriend the group process. And then finishing up, and I'm hoping there's going to be enough time to share a video clip with me that's really precious to me that I think you might enjoy. So that's the kind of content, the what of it. And then we're going to look at the how, because group is all about process. So we're going to be doing a number of reflections in breakout rooms that I hope will be really rich for you. You probably find that this is the most significant part of this session. We'll then be doing some gatherings. So whenever we move into small groups, we gather to come back into the whole group. A bit of teaching from me. And then we're going to do lots of short practices. And I have some Japanese poems for you, which I've been very engaged with. So you're going to get some Japanese poems. We'll have a break midway, and we'll have some silent practice for those of you who don't want to just sit with a cup of tea. And hopefully there will be some time for some question and answers. So we've gone one too far. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing, and some element of how we're going to do it. So just to now just sort of move up close into this business of groups and mindfulness. Of course, I don't know how many of you, but I imagine a number of you in this group of 96, I imagine a number of you learned mindfulness one-to-one. You may well have done. You may well have done some distance learning, or you may well have learnt one-to-one live. And I think that it works very nicely, actually. I think people learn very well, and they get lots of encouragement to keep practicing. But for me, there's a potential that's missing in the experience of the group, both in the experience of the program, but also in the learning outcomes that can happen through the group, which I hope will come clear during this session. It's very interesting, and when Gemma and I are working, Gemma Griffith and I are working together on group, and we're hoping to write a book about it. I'm hoping you hear is the operative word, but I'm sure we will eventually. When Gemma particularly looked into the research around mindfulness and groups, and actually when only of us do this, it's actually all about individual outcomes, which is sort of interesting, isn't it? You know, this world maybe less so now, but I suspect we'll go back into, the me culture. What's in this for me? I want to improve my self-esteem. I want to improve my mental health, understandably. But actually in the research that's been done, and a huge amount of research has been done, the group is hardly mentioned, which is really interesting, isn't it? It's almost like it's invisible. It's quite interesting to ask why. Why is the group so little seen? The best possible news is that when Rebecca Crane and others developed the MBI TAC, which I'm sure all of you will be quite familiar with, they included domain 6, which is the group domain. The holding of the group environment, the learning through the group environment, and it's worth reading that because it's really good stuff. So the group gets included in this tremendously important document that is really very influential around the world, actually. And of course, most of our participants are motivated to learn mindfulness, and I certainly was motivated to learn mindfulness through a strong dose of individual suffering. Of individual motivation. So I'd like to ask you for a moment just to reflect, just to perhaps put your pens down if you're taking notes, but just to pause for a second, come back to sitting in your chair, and just to pause for a second to reflect on what was it that brought you to mindfulness. Maybe it was a taster, maybe it was a short workshop, maybe you started with a full 8-week course. But can you remember the context? Can you remember what was happening in your life at that time? So what was happening for you? And maybe if you are taking notes, you don't need to, but if you are taking notes, maybe just note some kind of brief headline of remembering, well, what was it that brought you to mindfulness? Was there some element of personal suffering, stress, tricky time? And you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's something called reactions. So it would be very interesting to me if you just click on reactions, you can put a thumbs up. So if you'd like to, just click on the thumbs up, and I'd love to see as we go to gallery view how many of you are putting a thumbs up for coming into mindfulness because of some personal situation, personal suffering. It would be very interesting. We could do a poll here, but it would be very interesting. So just scrolling across your screen, it's very interesting, isn't it? So it's not all of you, but it's many of you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So if the motivation is very often led by personal need, not always, there might be some career element in there or some interest in the group maybe, or more of a wider community interest. But if the context is usually group, then what is this about? And let's have a look at, obviously there are some economic and practical reasons why we teach in groups, but yeah, let's have a look and see. So I'm going to share my screen again and just share with you some thoughts I have about mindfulness and groups. So for some reason my thing isn't moving on. There we are. So mindfulness is relational. We're told that a lot, aren't we? I remember when I was sitting in a Dharma retreat, Christina Feldman talking a lot about mindfulness is relational. I thought, I'm not entirely sure I know what she means. So let me just share with you what I think this speaks to, that mindfulness is really initially and for a long while, for all the time, is about exploring our inner experience. And in that, we learn to relate more kindly to our inner experience. We learn not to push things away quite so much, or if we do push them away, we notice that pushing away, and we work little by little, or we practice little by little with including rather than pushing away. And then we, in the 8-week course and during our lifetime of practice, we're translating this out into how we relate to our experience out in the world. And goodness, there's so much opportunity, isn't there, to discover this, to discover all our patterns of this outer, if you like, but also inner experience. And the mindfulness group is often where we actually start this learning. Not necessarily, but very often it is. And certainly it is for those that we're teaching. And then I was relating this, that I strongly have seen and experienced how often in the circle we learn from the experience of others. So we learn from the experience of others, and we see a different way of relating. So perhaps we notice in the group that somebody's doing something a bit differently to what we did, and we see, oh, that's a possibility. Oh, I could do it like that, or I could be like that. And then also there's that realization of, I do that too. The classic body scan, somebody admits that they went to sleep or felt very sleepy. I did that too. So there's that sense of a shared way of relating, which is actually very helpful. It's really very empowering. It's tremendously helpful. So just having that sense of mindfulness, which is relational, and the group, of course, is relational. So the group is tremendously important in how we learn mindfulness, and obviously there's lots more to say about that. I think that there's only really a possibility of transformation, which is obviously the potential in mindfulness. Potential transformation is really only possible when we can integrate what we learn on the inside, our inner experience, and translate it out into our lives in the world, and especially in our relationship with others. And it's really all about connection. So what better place than the group to learn that? What better place? It's a rich place to learn that. So you're now going to get the first of your Japanese poems, which I hope you'll enjoy. I've had huge fun actually finding them. So what we're going to do is that Stefan is going to do a clever little balancing act of getting the breakout rooms ready. I'm going to read you the poem, and we're just going to pause to see how the poem lands with you. It's very, very short. And I will write it into chat while you're in your breakout room so that you can see it in written. So here it goes. Under cherry trees, there are no strangers. Under cherry trees, there are no strangers. This reminds me of an image I have of an old lady who I used to know. She and I were walking down the street, and it was springtime, and there was a breeze and the wind, and she was walking underneath this cherry blossom. And the blossom, was caught by the wind, and it just fluttered down around her. I shall never forget it. And she kind of looked up, and she was just sort of surrounded by this blossom, and it actually brought tears to my eyes. It was so beautiful. So under cherry trees, there are no strangers. Yes, the PowerPoint will be available. So this is by Kobayashi Isa. And just pausing, and in a moment, Stefan will invite you into breakout rooms. And you're going to go into breakout rooms with a question. What does this poem say to you about groups? So when you're going into the breakout rooms, you know, if you don't think you can remember the question, you might just take a note of it. So when you go in, you can remember what was asked of you. What does this poem say to you about groups? Yeah, under cherry trees, there are no strangers. Okay, enjoy. And you'll just be in for 7 or 8 minutes, not for long. Yeah, just noticing how that was for you. That oh, I can see Marina from Brazil. Hello, it's fantastic to see you. Yeah, just welcome back, all of you. And you know, it's a frustration for me that we can't get some feedback about that, because I can imagine I'd love to have been with some of you to discuss that poem and what it says about group. Those cherry trees, that blossom. But let's move on, and let's just again, you know, you might want to be just capturing a few ideas from your breakout room. Just a few things that perhaps touched you, perhaps inspired you, perhaps surprised you. Under cherry trees, there are no strangers. Hmm. So while you're finishing off that capturing, I'm going to invite us just to stand for a moment, just to sort of refresh the body. And if you're lying down and it's not possible for you to stand, then that's okay. Just wriggle around perhaps in where you are. And just moving whatever part of the body would like to move. For me, it's the pelvis and the lower back. Perhaps the knees and the shoulders. Yeah, some shaking is good. Some of you are shaking out a little bit. But whatever you're going to do and whatever you are doing, really, really being aware of whatever the movement is that you're making. And that way we get to refresh the body with awareness, refresh the body with awareness of sensations. And Per, whatever you're doing, please don't do anything strenuously. Per has hurt his back. So I'm hoping he's lying and resting and easing out. So when you're ready, coming back to sit, and always knowing that at any point it might be a really good idea to stand again. So we'll be doing some movements as we go along. Neil, it looks like you're outside. It's rather nice. Yeah. So that's good. That's good. Okay. So we're going to move on once you're comfortable and ready. I'm going to move my screen a little bit. So we're going to move on, and I'm going to share with you something that a close colleague of mine from Ireland said to me not that long ago, which I thought was, I kind of knew it, but she spoke it, and And she said the group psyche is naturally more healthy than the sum of the individuals within the group. The group psyche is naturally more healthy than the sum of the individuals within the group. Well, now, you have to put a kind of proviso there, because we can think of some groups that are far from healthy. You can think of some groups that, currently in the world that are far from healthy. So I think the proviso we have to put, the little kind of addendum or the little brackets we have to put at the end of that sentence is, under certain wholesome conditions. Right? So groups aren't just by themselves. Gangs aren't, they're not naturally healthy, but under certain conditions, and that's really what I want to share with you, the conditions that I think are necessary for groups to do pretty well, really. And I think the conditions are not that complicated. I think there are some basic tools, there's some basic understandings. And I think when they're in place, then I think our groups on the whole do pretty well. So I want to spend quite a bit of time looking at the forming process in mindfulness-based groups, the forming, the coming together, the movement from people walking into a room not knowing each other to the group actually forming and melding and becoming some kind of community or unit, albeit might be a great one, or it might be a not such a great one, but coming into some functioning of group, some group entity in the room, this thing that I'm encouraging some thought about. So it's quite interesting. I was reflecting on whether I'd worked in a mindfulness on a mindfulness program without the forming of group, and actually I do well remember a group that never formed, and it was probably a group that I shouldn't have actually worked with, although there was no harm done. But I just had cancer, and I think I came back too soon. And I think this group, who were delightful, they really wanted a friendship group. They wanted friendship pairs and friendship triads. And so they loved going into small groups, but they didn't do a huge amount of talking about mindfulness. And I'm not convinced they learned that much about mindfulness. I remember talking to my supervisor about it and saying, this seems a bit of a waste. And she said, well, maybe it's what they need and maybe it's what you need. So I think there's some trusting in that's really quite interesting. A colleague of mine who became a very, very senior teacher, she told me that the first mindfulness program she ever took part in was incredibly well taught. I mean, it was really first class, but she never got to know anybody's name in the group. They never did any small group work. There was never any communication across the circle or with people. I don't know if they actually sat in a circle. They could have sat in rows. So it's quite interesting that you can get a good experience of mindfulness, but not necessarily in a group. There are some certain conditions that need to happen. So we walk into the group room as strangers. We don't know each other. And I often reflect on this at the start of groups, and I really encourage you, perhaps you do too, that you're sitting in a group in a circle and like you can see that people are nervous. You probably feel quite nervous too. I often feel nervous on the first week of an 8-week course or the first beginning of a training program. It's understandable, it's a big journey, isn't it? I'm very unkeen on that word journey at the moment. It's very overused, but it is. It's a big number. It's a big process. But actually, we look around the circle, and actually, in a day or two, or if it's an intensive, or in a few sessions, the group has a completely different feel. The circle feels different. People can look across, can smile, can greet each other, and it's beginning to form. So to begin with, groups are very scary. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Or they can be. They're very scary. Don't know what's going to go on. Some people are sitting in a circle for the first time. Those of us who've done loads of training, it's all very well for us. We kind of know how to kind of rehearse in our head. My name is Trish. I do a lot of that in a new group, don't you? I mean, you kind of rehearse I don't actually sit in that many groups these days, but that I'm not leading, but you do that rehearsing in your head, what you're going to say. and it's what everybody does. It's very understandable because it's scary and it's really uncertain to begin with. So we're going to move now to another Japanese poem as we move towards looking at this business of the forming of groups. And Stefan is going to do his magic trick with breakout rooms. And I'm going to read you another poem that I think in some ways also relates to this business of groups coming together. So here's the poem. And some of you are getting all ready to write it down, which I can understand. But how about don't write it down to begin with? How about just listen? Just listen. And I promise you, it's in the chat. So if you look in the chat, you'll see the other poem is there too. And I'm going to repeat it enough times that you'll remember. So here's your poem. A field of cotton, as if the moon had flowered. A field of cotton, as if the moon had flowered. So the question, and that's by Basho, lovely name, 1644 to 1694, Basho, another Japanese poem. A field of cotton, as if the moon had flowered. So you're going to go into breakout rooms again and the same sort of similar threes. And again, it'll be quite brief. So I hope that you're going to get used to this reasonably brief exchanges. And this time we will put in a broadcast just 3 minutes before coming out, so you can come out with a few shared headlines, very brief shared headlines. So think back to your early mindfulness 8-week courses and groups. Think back to those early days, or perhaps the first teacher training group that you were involved with, but maybe even earlier, maybe the first 8-week course that you were on. And the question is, did the group feel safe? Did the group feel safe? And then the kind of subsequent question to that, or did it remain as cotton? Remember the poem, A Field of Cotton. So did the group feel safe? Or did it remain just as cotton, a field of cotton? And the second question is, what helped to build a sense of community in that group? What helped to build a sense of community? And the subsequent thing is, did it flower? A field of cotton, as if the moon had flowered. Gosh, wouldn't you like to have written a poem like that? A field of cotton, as if the moon had flowered. Okay, Stefan, and your questions are, did the group feel safe, and what helped to build a sense of community? So just brief phrases or a word that in some way spoke to some part of your shared experience in your group. We've got rhythm, we've got attitudinal foundations, we've got another welcoming environment. Feeling I'm not judged, that's lovely. And I agree, large groups can feel quite intimidating. Feeling safe, common purpose, shared passion, that's nice. Small group. Internal organization, which created mobility within the group. That's interesting, isn't it? Dyads, lovely. People showing up each week. Yeah. The teacher can make a big difference. The teacher holds the group container. Yes, that's an important point. Acknowledging discomfort, that's very important, isn't it? So that's wonderful. There's all this coming up, and I think really important stuff. So just have a little look at the chat and all these comments, which I hope very much reflected. So let's just ask you, as I move away from the chat, just go to your reactions again. Just go to this reactions at the bottom, and just let's have some thumbs again. Was there a community, a sense of community in your first 8-week course? So let's have thumbs up to for those of you who did feel a sense of community. I can see some of you shaking your head, yes. So let's go across the screens and just see how many of you did have that. I reckon it's about half, if that. No, probably a bit less than that, actually. A bit less than that. So that's interesting in itself, isn't it? That, for some of you, but for many of you, that was not the case. There wasn't a shared sense of community. So that tells us a lot, that maybe the potential, when there isn't a shared sense of community, the potential is reduced, actually. So let's just come back to a brief practice, just coming back to a sense of sitting here. And maybe in this practice, inviting you to practice this with your eyes open. It's very often the case that when we practice, we tend to close the eyes, we go inward. So let's just let the gaze be soft, coming to a sense of contact between the body that you're sitting on, the floor. And then maybe coming into this question of, what's going on for me right now? What's going on for me right now? And perhaps noticing what's going on for me right now in the body. How's the body? And then maybe noticing what's going on for me right now in the mind, in the mood of mind. Sometimes referred to as the climate of mind, which I quite like. And then also, perhaps asking yourself, what's going on in the heart right now? And just visiting your heart center. Perhaps the seat of your emotions, perhaps something slightly different. What's going on in your heart right now? All the time having this background awareness of feet contact, seat contact, body sitting. And the breath. Breath breathing. Okay. So shifting around, and we'll now move to another screen share. And I want to share with you some ideas about forming. So just let's look at the conditions that the group needs, or that we need to establish with the group in order to help the group actually become a group. So here we are back to the inside out group model. And you notice that forming isn't there, but the learning context is. And the inside out embodiment of the teacher very much is. So we'll keep referring back to this, but let's move to the first slide for forming the circle. And as I've mentioned, the PDF of these slides will be available on the Friends of Bangor website. So really the first important condition that's needed is to establish safety. So, the question, how to cultivate a safe space? Because if it's not safe, the group isn't going to form. It's really essential. So one of the places that we go to with this, which is probably true of a house, or it's true of all sorts of sort of structures actually, that we need boundaries. So we need outer boundaries. We need to clarify who is in the group. So if you're meeting as a group and there's an interruption, somebody comes bursting through the door, or I remember a group where somebody brought their sister-in-law along. Well, that was quite something. I think it was about the third session, you know, and she was really enjoying it. So she thought her sister-in-law might enjoy it as well. So that's like, oops, you know, that's not safe actually, to just have somebody turn up who wasn't expected and who hadn't gone through the process of preparation. So clarifying who is in the group and really holding those outer boundaries. So if there's an interruption, the teacher as the leader of the group needs to deal with the interruption, hopefully quite politely, but also quite firmly. You know, this is the group, this is the space. So having that sense. And then there's inner boundaries. So there's kind of cultivating respectful ways of relating within the group. And again, I'm sure we've all had experiences where somebody said something in the group that isn't terribly respectful. It's not very appropriate. And how we can actually move in and respond to that, again, kindly, but also quite firmly, because if safety is lost, then, you know, it's really not going to work. The group isn't going to be safe. It's not going to come together. So ground rules are really important right at the beginning, but perhaps they have to be repeated. They need to be very simple. They need to be very easy to remember. And they're very often, they're mentioned perhaps in the orientation. So the orientation process, I mean, this is a really important part of the whole group forming. You wouldn't think it would be. You'd imagine that groups start to form once they meet in the same place. It's not so. Groups start to form as soon as somebody has thought, yeah, I think I'll do that course. And they've read some blurb and they're starting to think, oh, I wonder what that's going to be like. Who will be in the group? How will it be for me? So this orientation and assessment process is preparing for the program, preparing for the home practice and all the other aspects. It's also preparing for the group. And the assessment process is very much important to the inner boundaries, making sure that only people coming along to the group are people for whom it's the right time to be doing it, and who can actually manage a group. I remember assessing and having a meeting, one-to-one meeting with a man who'd had a horrid cancer, and he was, he thought he might want to. I don't think he was ever that sure, but he had troubles listening. And I said to him, you know, this is going to be in a group. How will that be? And he said, oh, Lord, I know. I can't bear groups. I can't bear them. And I said, well, maybe this isn't going to be for you. And it really wouldn't have been. So it's really assessing about group relating as well as other aspects. It's quite important. So establishing safety. And then we move to the next aspect of forming the circle, forming the group. And that's how to cultivate helpful connections. And this is, you know, some of this is really obvious, but it's very easy to miss out and forget how obvious it is. A welcome is very important. Very important to be present as people come in the room. Not just present physically, but present mindfully. You know, present as they come in, welcoming them in, making them feel welcome. Something that people often relate back to me, you know, that was so important right at the beginning. They walk in scared, unsure, and there's this welcome. And there's enough chairs in the circle. Gosh, that's important. You know, recount your chairs several times if you're teaching live. You know, make sure you've got enough chairs. The worst thing in the world is somebody turning up late and there's not a chair for them. That's, you know, that's really has an impact actually. And then names and introductions. You know, that's again obvious, but important that they know your name, important that you've introduced yourself, important they've had a chance to just speak into the circle or speak onto the screen. It's sad that you haven't had a chance to do that. But obviously with so many of you, it's not been possible. So we have to acknowledge that a group of, I think we're 96 or something, it's not really a group, which is a shame, but we're learning about groups, which is precious. So pairs and small group process are very, very important. This is the way that we can cultivate connections. And it's worth thinking about, well, what size group? You know, let's encourage you to swing the changes. So sometimes it's pairs. Online, as we're working a lot at the moment, 3s are best. 2s online are not so good. But 3s online they work quite nicely. The smaller the group you have, the more intimate it is, the more likely that people are going to share some level of intimacy. And so, again, be thinking about the task. Have a clear task and be thinking about, well, is this more a reflective question? Or is this more of a kind of connecting question? I tend to do pairs quite often early on, but I probably in the first session when people are beginning to introduce themselves, I don't often do pairs after that. Threes are probably more connecting. And obviously, you know, it sort of moves things around a bit, but have a clear task. Don't imagine that one question is enough. Write it up on the flip chart. Repeat the question. Get it into chat if you can, if you're working online, although that doesn't really work because they don't see it once they go into the breakout rooms. But keep the questions simple and clear. And then keep mixing up the group. So this I'm kind of dancing in between online and live, but you know, if you're working live with a group, it's really helpful if the teacher herself stands up. So let's move into a small group. You know, I'm going to stand up and you don't need to. I'm going to stand up and look around the room and notice, well, who do you not know? Whose name do you not know yet? And maybe going towards the people who you don't know. And sharing names each time, so that hopefully, it depends on the size of your group, of course, but you know, if you're working with sort of 10 or 12 or less than that, hopefully by the second or third session, they'll have clocked most people's names, hopefully, because that really helps. And keep mixing the groups up. So, you know, if you're saying, you know, who did you not work with last, or who did you not go in a group with last week, or who have you not been in a group with yet? So you're all the time, hopefully, building these connections. Quite helpful. So this last slide of forming the circle, and this is the practice community. Practice is a huge part of forming the circle. It's really very important. So how do we build the practice community? Well, of course, the course structure in a way does this for us. So we're doing formal practices, we're guiding them in the group. They're going away, they're doing them at home, knowing that everybody else in the group is also doing it. And we're having brief practices threaded through. So just like we are with this session, we're threading through. I really recommend these very brief practices. Not even 3 minutes, not even a minute. Just a coming to feet on the floor. You know, a coming to how are things right now, a little pause. So these brief practices threaded through that also can be threaded through into everyday life, but can be done with the eyes open. You can actually see the group, feet on the floor. Let's keep our eyes open, everybody, feet on the floor, yeah? So grounding promotes stability. I've highlighted that. Grounding is so important. Having this anchor of feet on the floor. The breath to some extent, but the breath is not such a good anchor as feet on the floor, particularly in the early stages of forming the circle. Probably not going to talk about that, but that can come up in questions if we have time. And at times of difficulty in the session, you know, at times when things are edgy, or you kind of lost your notes, or I don't know, somebody's upset, or somebody leaves the room, or you know, at times where that edge, where you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? And we all have those times. Then having some way of coming back, perhaps to feet on the floor, having some way of coming back to an anchor, having some way of keeping the eyes open, really encourage this, particularly at times of difficulty, keeping the eyes open, soft gaze perhaps, keeping the eyes open, coming to feet on the floor. Let's just take a pause. Yeah? And then horizontal inquiry, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, of those of you who've been in training with me, that it's very easy to imagine that horizontal inquiry is the same as popcorn. So we do a practice and then we say, well, anybody got a word or two, some part of that experience? Some part of that experience. And people then come up with loads of words. Oh, sleepy, restless, engaged, this, that, the other, yeah? And actually that's popcorn, that's just creating a list. So horizontal inquiry is just taking one word at a time. Sleepy, yeah, sleepy. Anyone else notice that? And we get some nods, which is a chance for the circle to just sort of step in, even just with a nod or a just a sort of I don't know what that is. I don't know what that noise is. I don't know how to describe that noise, but a sort of sort of noise that just means that people have been able to step in and be part of the group. It's very precious, actually. So horizontal inquiry is a very important part of forming the group. So back we go to the inside out group model. And you see that this triangle in the middle is all about the groundedness of the teacher, the capacity of the teacher to come back to inside awareness, to inside embodiment, to be able to actually, you know, hopefully have some stability, to be able to hold what's going on. We'll get to the other parts as we go on. So I'm going to stop the share at that point. Yeah, time to take a drink. That's a good idea. I think probably I need to do that, don't I? So I will in a minute. So just to sort of emphasize really that forming, we kind of imagine that forming is needed on the first session, maybe a bit on the second session. I would challenge this actually. I think forming is needed all the way through the program. I think if the group hasn't formed by week 7, you've probably had it. Week 8, you probably had it, you know. But you know, it's unlikely really. If you've been setting up all these conditions, if you've been doing small groups, if you've been doing lots of grounding, if you've been doing lots of language around we, you know, we do that, don't we? Lots of horizontal inquiry. The group will form for sure. It's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. It's not such a big deal. If the conditions are in place and if it's safe, and if there's lots of connecting, and if there's a good dose of practice threaded into the whole program. It's not too much of us teaching. So she who's been teaching non-stop, but unfortunately with this number I don't have much choice. But I'm enjoying it. I hope it's all right for you. So forming is needed throughout the program, and you might be thinking, well, how do we keep forming? But the small groups will do that. Shifting chairs is very helpful. You know, people often go and sit in the same seat. And you can actually have an exercise of changing chairs, or maybe you just keep changing chairs. That's what I do. I just sit in a different chair. And then we do a small group and I might go and talk to somebody and then I sit in another different chair. So there's this sort of culture of just changing chairs. And at some point we acknowledge that and say, how is that? We don't normally do that, do we? When we sit in the same chair in the sitting room, everybody sits at the same chair in the dining room table. We kind of fix our positions, don't we? Let's try doing it differently. So we're building connections and we're normalizing. It's very important. The other thing is that groups have development stages. So it's really important. So we've got the forming as the first development stage. But they move on, you know, forming happens and then it doesn't happen, we come back. And it's not linear. It's not, you know, many of you will know about Tuckman's development stages, which is something, it's a good article to read. It's quite old, but it's quite a good article to read, although it's obviously not so much about mindfulness, but more about work groups, work teams. But it is, and his development model is forming, storming, norming, performing, and then adjourning as it finishes. So when forming, you know, each stage has different needs really, and we're going to touch into it, but really only touching into it here. But as I've said to you before, if the group is well formed and you've really invested in the connecting, in the safety, and in the practice element of the group, I don't think it's such a problem. I think the group will form. So let's just come to the breath. Let's just shift the position slightly. And with your eyes open or your eyes closed, it's fine to close your eyes if you'd like to, just dropping into a sense of the body sitting here. weight going down. Body sitting. And then when you're ready, coming to the breath. Just including the breath in your awareness, if that feels okay for you. If it's better for you to have the anchor into the feet, contact to the body with what you're sitting or lying on, then doing that. So choosing an anchor, the breath, or someplace else in the body. Perhaps coming up close to the breath, coming up close to your anchor. And perhaps coming up close to the detail of the very beginnings of the next in-breath. How does it feel to breathe in? And then maybe exploring a sense of the out-breath. So the very beginnings of the next out-breath. How does it feel to breathe out? Remembering that if the mind wanders, which it may well do, remembering it's not a problem. It's simply what minds do. You just notice and gently come back. Coming back to the anchor that you've chosen, the breath or the feet, contact of the body. Coming back to this moment's experience. So Stefan, I'm going to change my mind about what we arranged. Could you enable people to be able to unmute themselves? And then inviting, we're not going to do this for very long because I think it's important to have a break, but let's just open up to just a couple of questions. So I suggest that if anyone's got a burning question, a question that you think would be of some relevance to everybody about forming, about this business of forming. And if somebody's got a question, what would be quite good is just to go to the reactions button, if you can find it, and perhaps just put a thumbs up, and then we can see what we've got. So just There we are. So Victoria, you were first in. Well done. Let me just see what else we've got. See if anyone else has a question. So there you are. And Per has got a question as well. So let's just hear from Victoria first, and then we'll go to Per. So just a brief question, Victoria, please.
Trish, do you have one tip for forming online? The one most important thing.
Oh wow.
Oh, okay. Any important thing.
No, I'm just reflecting on that. So forming online.
In a 4 and 8 week course.
Yeah, the most important thing is the numbers that you're working with. So really important. I mean, the smaller the group, in some ways, the better. Obviously, more than 6 or 7. But I think then it's very possible to form the group. I think it's very possible to use plenty of breakout rooms, coming back, gathering the themes that they're bringing back with them, getting them to agree themes that they bring back with, getting quite good at the technology of managing all that. But I think size is a bigger issue online than it is in the room. I think I'd say that. But that's such a good question, Victoria. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So I want to go to Per, who is on further down here. Per, where are you? I've lost you.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can see you, yes. Per,
Yeah.
your question.
Yeah, talk about the group sizes, but also what's the impact then in the early formings of the group? If you're using the breakout groups, but you are rotating the people. So you are changing the group composition early on. So they're not small cliques are forming. Or what is the best? What's your experience of?
Oh yes, definitely. Whether you're live or whether you're on breakout rooms, it's really important to be moving people around, because what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to form connections. So we're wanting to reduce the chance of somebody kind of transferring some image to somebody else. I like, if I was sitting in a group with you, Per, I might look at you and think, oh gosh, he looks like a clever bloke. And then I talk to you and realize you're very clever, but actually you're also really funny. Yeah. So there's a way in which when we speak to somebody, we actually drop some projection about them that we perhaps connected. I think at the beginning of this, I told you that I had 2 particular group teachers that had really impacted on my group practice. I think, I mean others, but 2 particularly. And Francis Batten was one. I don't know if any of you knew him. But I went into a long training course with him, and before we even started, I realized he reminded me of my father-in-law. He looked very much like my father-in-law, and I knew straight away that was going to be a little bit tricky, because I was already imagining that he was going to function towards me like my father-in-law, and I didn't really want to be in a training group with my father-in-law. So I actually spoke to him and said, Francis, you kind of remind me of my father-in-law. And he said, oh, let's have a conversation. He wasn't a bit like my father-in-law. Once we'd spoken, it dropped away. So I think, yes, we don't stay in the small groups, but if you do some of the things I mentioned, find somebody you've not spoken to, organize the breakout rooms in such a way that we're mixing people up. It gets complicated, but it's quite possible. Yep. Thanks, Per. That's great. That's really great. So thank you, all of you. We're going to have a break now. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite you to, you can leave if you want to, or you can just stop the video and mute the mutes. I think are all on anyway, Stefan, are they? Have you put the mutes back on? Yeah. So you can just stop your video and you can go make yourself a cup of tea and have a bit of a break. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back and I'm going to put my stool down here and I'm just going to practice in silence. I'm just going to practice in silence, and we're going to start again probably about 5 to 4. So we'll have a fat 20-minute break. So 5 to 4 we'll be starting to get the show on the road again. Okay. So enjoy your break. See if you can get some very brief, just do a very brief practice in your break. But if you'd like to, come and join me for a silent sit in about 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. So I hope that most people are back now and that you enjoyed your break. I've got people digging up my garden. Unfortunately, they decided not to do the kind of one today, because I think that could have been a bit challenging. Okay. So as we come back after the break, having looked quite a bit at forming, I was reflecting on Per's question, and just wanted to emphasize before we move on that it's really important these small groups are an opportunity to mix people up. You know, exactly as he said, not to have the same people having the same threes each time. And that's the advantage of standing up and finding somebody you don't know, you don't know their name. That's the advantage, that people then naturally kind of mix up and they don't just stay with the people next to them. Okay. So let's just come for a moment to a pause, and just to pause with your eyes open, if that's okay for you. And perhaps start on the inside and to notice what's going on for me right now. So in the body and in the mind. And then inviting you to move to the outside, so into the room in which you're sitting. Just having a sense of the surroundings, the colors, the textures, the sounds. And then also coming onto the screen, so moving to gallery view. And just having a look. And look at all these different faces. It's so fascinating that we're all a bit different, aren't we? All the faces a bit different. So our difference is wonderful. And our connection is wonderful. Connection isn't always wonderful, but just looking at who's here. Noticing if you're particularly drawn to some names or some people you know or people you think you might know. And others, the colors. Mm-hmm. So we've looked at forming, and I'm going to suggest that we move on now to this subject of group membership. I have to say that there would have been a number of ways in which I could have shared some of this material with you, and I decided that we'd go a bit more deep into some areas rather than having a sort of comprehensive look at it all. So please be aware that I've just chosen little spotlights, if you like, to engage with. But there's going to be a reading list and some articles that Stefan's going to put up on Friends of Bangor website and I'll get up on my own website, probably not immediately, but in the next week or so. Just some suggestions of some other reading you can do, just to get a bit of a sort of broader perspective. But hopefully that this will be a good start. So we're going to move on to look at group membership. Going to look at these questions of what do our participants bring with them into the group? It's a really important question. What do our participants bring with them into the group? And when we come into groups, what do we bring with us? You know, what are the influences that come to bear on how we are in groups, or how participants are in groups, individuals are in groups? And actually thinking about it, what do we know about our participants before the start of the course? Probably not very much. It's probably quite minimal. And just reflecting really on how does this impact? So I want to share with you, I'm going to share the screen again. I want to share with you a few kind of headings really, and this is a huge topic. So they very much are just beginnings, just headings. And they're ones that are quite tender. So I think as we move into this, really encouraging you to keep coming back to your feet on the floor, to keep coming back to a sense of sitting here. And, you know, and really looking after yourself. I mean, there's nothing risky or dangerous here, but they're tender places that we can go to. So the first place around group membership that might have quite an influence on how people relate within the group is personal histories, which we all have. So our families, our kind of early narratives, if you like. You know, our experience at school, or our experiences at school, kind of all that schoolyard stuff that I have, I mean, still impacts on me, I'm sure. I know, actually. And then, you know, some sort of early work experiences. You know, all that anxiety when we start a new job, all those sorts of coming into new groups, those sorts of influences. And I think there could have been a number of things I could have put into that bracket, but I think belonging is something that seems to me to be an important thread in those kind of those sort of personal stories. Do I belong here? Am I accepted? Am I liked? Do I have a place? Is there a place for me here? And I wonder if this just perhaps speaks of the way we're influenced in terms of how we relate to authority. And really, in a mindfulness-based group, the authority is the teacher. I mean, we would love not to be, perhaps. We would, you know, I think sometimes we veer too much towards trying to be, you know, a really good mate to everybody. Actually, the group needs a certain authority at the beginning, needs the structure. And actually, you know, these personal histories and narratives and all the rest will influence how people relate to us, to you as teacher. And then there's society in general. Again, an absolutely massive topic. So very much around, you know, the impact of gender, the impact of identity, of culture, of race, of colour, and of socioeconomic background. You know, the impact of our sexuality, our yeah, and again, I've put into brackets here finding my voice, because that seemed to be the one of the threads that kind of weaves its way through some of these, I don't know, some of these influences, some of these experiences. I mean, this isn't just academic stuff. This is all, each one of those words will link with a whole stack of different experiences. So obviously this very much influences how we relate to others. and how we find our voice. How do we find our voice in the group? Is it a struggle to find the voice? Or is it actually is it something we do a bit much of? So then the trauma is another one I've put here. And actually, of course, trauma really could go into either personal history or society. It could almost go in the middle of those two. But I thought it was important to bring out, and I know that Elinid gave a very good talk on trauma quite recently. I understand that it's not good enough quality to get onto the website, which is a real shame, but I think it is available, even if the quality isn't great. So trauma has a very triggering impact. So it's something that I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail here, but it's traumatic events and traumatic patterns can be triggered and can repeat internally. And I think we have to acknowledge that in the people, well, in this group of, I can't remember how many people there are now, 88 people, this group of 88 people, a fair proportion of us will have experienced trauma. A fair proportion of us. And even though the trauma might have been some time ago, it will still get triggered at times. I've certainly experienced trauma, and it does get triggered at times. So trauma influencing how we relate to ourselves and events around us. I remember some time ago a woman being traumatized by the raisin, of all things. And I was not very experienced. I was very alarmed. She was obviously triggered by the raisin up towards her mouth. And I didn't ever know the reason, but I could certainly guess. So it's something we really need to look out for in our groups. It's fortunately, thanks to David Treleaven and others, it's becoming much more taught, we're much more aware of this. So it's really important to be thinking about and to be aware of. So all these, these three headings, they're pretty massive, aren't they? They're pretty huge. I mean, I noticed just in talking to you about them, I don't feel quite as grounded as I did when we started this half session. Just sort of imagining, all of you, the 88 of you, and all the different things we've all been through, which I know nothing about or very little about. But that's what it is to be human. That's what's happening at the moment. Lots of traumatizing happening at the moment. So really, really having some awareness and not being too scared about this, because we're not offering therapy. We're not needing to know the ins and outs of everybody's personal histories. It's not appropriate. It's not necessary either. But just knowing that all these influences are going to have some bearing on what our participants bring with us into groups. And sometimes we can have guesses, sometimes we're aware, sometimes we're told, but often we're not. So a teacher of mine a long time ago used to talk about the trailers that we kind of dragged behind us. I like this very much. That all our stuff, all our I've just recently cleared out my house, and gosh, there was a lot of junk. So all the kind of life junk is in the trailer that I carry behind me. Not so much now, but used to, certainly. And it's no surprise that as we get older, is my sound still all right, Stefan? I just pulled it. Yeah. As we get older, we get more stooped. And I've just got this vision. You get more stooped because we're pulling more behind us. Yeah. And it's so brilliant that there are things like mindfulness courses and talking therapies that we can just shed some of that load little by little. There's that possibility. There's that potential anyway. So what can we do as teachers? you know, to manage all of that, because it is a bit huge and it probably is a bit scary just even to touch into that, like what do our participants bring with them into groups. And you have to wait for the next section to get some answers to that. But just bringing awareness into it, I think, is really useful. I think the other thing that we can also bring to mind is the roles that people play in groups. And we're going to look into this a little bit in our next breakout room. But just to sort of give you some headings of this, you know, I remember it always makes me laugh actually, but I remember in a training group that we would meet every now and again, and one of the trainees always brought a cake. She was a real helper. Her role was just such a nurturing, helping sort of role. It was so kind. But it was so obvious that she was a bit stuck in that role, actually. But, you know, I was awfully loath to sort of gently move her on because the cakes were so nice, you know. It was so nice to have cake each time. But we managed to sort of joke about it. You know, I can't remember her name, but, you know, oh, look, you brought another cake. Oh, fantastic. And you don't have to, you know. No. So just really be thinking about the roles we take on in groups. You know, there are the challengers, which can be quite, you know, they can be challenging. The people who, I remember in a group, you know, an early training group, and this man in the group who I thought was incredibly clever and I was a bit scared of, and said, why do we do the body scan? You know, why do we start with the body scan? And I thought, oh, I don't know that I know, and also I don't really want to answer that question. And like, what do I do next? So, you know, sometimes it's really challenging. You know, what am I going to do with this? I'd say to you, always have a pause. You know, you might say, well, I don't know. Let's pause. Let's get our feet on the floors. You know, it's always a good strategy, I think. And the clarifiers. I mean, there are lots of different roles that people take. But the clarifiers, the ones who say, you know, what was the question we were meant to be looking at? I can't remember what you said. Very helpful. Very, very helpful. So these roles that people play in groups, very often, even if they're a bit challenging, they're very often helping the task that we're trying to undertake, you know, to learn mindfulness. And also they're obviously often helping the process of the group. Early on in a group, group members tend to be quite compliant, and that actually initially feels really nice, you know. Might finish a week one class and you can go home and talk to your partner and say, oh, that's such a lovely group, you know, really lovely. I think it's going to be a great group. And of course, they're tremendously keen to please, and they're tremendously keen to do the right thing. So they're not really showing their own personalities at all as individuals. And the group hasn't formed yet. I mean, it seems like it's just like a very nice group, but they're just really flattering us, you know. Oh, you know, how long have you been practicing for, Trish? Oh, it must have been years and years now, you know. It's that kind of very easy to get taken in by it, but please don't. Please don't. It's early group behavior. It's ways of them feeling safe, you know. That's how they've learned, you know, to be a good girl or be a good boy. And it's lovely. It's really nice. It's a really nice way of starting, but it's honeymoon time. And you'll find that as the group goes on, then the personalities and the different characters seem to come sort of filter through, which is great. It's a really good sign. So at some point, of course, group members need to test out their boundaries, and that's where storming comes in. And I'm actually not going to go tremendously into storming because it's a whole big topic, but just to be aware that it's really useful, because the function of storming is to test the boundaries of the group. Is this a group where I can feel safe enough to do what I've come for? It's hugely important. So a group that doesn't storm is never really going to make it as a group. But also to be aware that, you know, at the moment anyway, I'd love it to change, but at the moment in mindfulness, we're all pretty polite. We're all pretty middle class, right? Doesn't follow that middle class is polite and working class isn't, but we are all actually pretty polite. And the storming will happen internally. So it'll happen perhaps through body language or not doing a practice or kind of, you know, not really being engaged maybe. So you won't necessarily see the storming, but it's very helpful if you do. And you may well have a session. I often think weeks 4 or 5, there might well be some storming. But it might be, it might be weeks 2 or 3. But just a bit of challenge, a little bit like teenagers, who've got to challenge the parents to actually move into some level of sort of independent living, really. And it's uncomfortable, but it's important. So really, what the storming is doing is it safe to be myself in this group? A bit like we said with the society, finding the voice. It's really important. Is it safe to stay? Making some choices there. And remember all the trailers that they drag with them. So it's not personal. This isn't about me being a good or a bad teacher. This is actually a sign of strength as a teacher, that this group has now moved to another stage. They're becoming a group. They're beginning to challenge. They're beginning to sort of push their elbows out a bit. It is uncomfortable, but actually it's good. It's good stuff. Take them to supervision. Take them into your heart. Take them onto your cushion. And remember that shared universal vulnerability that we all share, that actually this is moving it towards that, which is really great. So we have another poem. I have another poem for you, another Japanese poem. I hope you're getting to enjoy them. And Stefan will set up the next lot of breakout groups, breakout rooms. So here's the poem. So just letting it arrive, letting it land. Children imitating cormorants are even more wonderful than cormorants. Children imitating cormorants are even more wonderful than cormorants. So this was translated from the Japanese, and the original author was Kobayashi Issa, my friend. 1763 to 1828. Yeah. So the breakout rooms are going to set up in a second, and just as I said to you before, but really going gently with this. Really going gently. But the question is, what are the familiar group roles for you? Where do you go to in a group? What are the roles you take? And perhaps if you want to, but only if you want to, because we haven't got that long. But just looking at what might have influenced you to be moving into those kind of familiar roles. And perhaps there might be early roles, and then there might be later roles in the group, in the life of the group. So what are the familiar group roles for you? And what have been the influences for you in these roles? And the poem is, children imitating cormorants are even more wonderful than cormorants. Okay, so you'll be in your breakout room for about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, not very long. Make sure you all have some time. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Yeah. So I'm curious. I don't know whether it's possible that you could just share, perhaps just a phrase in chat that not your own personal experience, but the kind of the shared. I don't know if you had time in the 3 minutes before you finished, the shared experience. That's nice. So just having a look at chat as it's coming through, this shared experience of the groups, the roles we play in groups. Some roles we play all of our lives. Yes, absolutely. The Russian doll of storming, that's nice. Influences of childhood experiences on what roles we take on and how they can change throughout the life of the group. Absolutely. And some roles are forced on us. Joker. Yes, actually, jokers. Yeah, I love having a joker in the group. Illumination of individuals. So just having a look at this observer reflector. School experience, but also noticing these can change over time. It's a way of being accepted and belonging. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, they're not wrong. And we can resign from our roles if we choose to. Yes, we can bring awareness to what roles we're taking. And the good student, whoever that is, gosh, how many of us, come on, let's go to the reactions. How many of us like to be the good student? I'm putting my thumb up. Yeah, yeah. We like to be the good one, don't we? I'm going across the pages. Yes, look at all these good students. It's so understandable. It's so understandable. But like, let's do it differently now. Let's do it differently. And let's like, so that the thumbs go down. Let's how about the rebels? Who are the rebels in the group? You know, gosh, don't ever teach me in a group. I am a dreadful group member, absolutely dreadful. So be brave and put your thumb up if you're a bit of a rebel. No, we don't have that many rebels. Yes, we've got one there. That's good. So interesting. Would you like to be a rebel? Yeah. Would you like to be a bit of a rebel? You're smiling. Just this thought of perhaps being a rebel. Yeah. You've not got that many rebels. I wonder if that's Pascal was a good rebel. Yeah. I wonder if that's true about mindfulness. We're much more likely to be a good student. It depends. If the teacher is incompetent, I'm a rebel. Yes, that's all true too. Yes, absolutely. An escapee, yes. Yes, lovely. Okay, that's nice. And you know, if we can laugh at the roles that we take, if we can just smile at them, you know, they're not fixed. They're very much influenced by conditions. And we just bring awareness to them, and then we have a choice. We could do it differently. Go into the next group, and we can do it differently. None of our so-called selves are fixed. You know, think back to, I don't know, when you were 15, when you were 20. You know, what would have been the so-called me then? Very, very different. But then think on to mindfulness, ebb and flow of possible roles. Lovely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and really, you know, in some ways, what is mindfulness? What is the kind of all the development that all of you have been doing around mindfulness, and all the different learning that you've done in your work, in your work lives, in your, you know, in the development of yourself as mindfulness teachers, and in all the other things, you know, the professions that you've taken on. There's been a huge amount of learning and awareness that's happened through that. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. That you know, and just having some awareness that this is quite tender stuff. This is quite tender stuff. You know, it really is. And so just go gently. If you've touched into some tender place, some memory that was quite hard for you, really having awareness of that. Maybe sitting with that tonight. And maybe coming back now to a sense of groundedness. So coming back quite deliberately to your feet on the floor. So just shifting position is always helpful. And you know, we're not going to do this for long. We're just going to drop into this moment of feet on the floor. See if you can really know the contact between your feet and what they're touching, or your legs and what they're touching if you're sitting cross-legged. And you just really feel that sense of gravity. Gravity pulling us closer to the floor, to the earth beneath us. So helpful just to come back, drop in, feet on the floor. Okay. So I've got another screen share with you. So just wanting to look at wanting to look at margins and mainstream. So this is another really important area, and it particularly links, well, I guess it links the personal history, but it also very much links with the kind of impact of society and culture. You know, this is massively important, and of course it's so topical. All the the challenges that are happening to the status quo, to the wrong status quo. From, I don't know if people of colour would describe themselves as on the margins. I hope not, but I suspect that many of them have experienced being placed on the margins. So in our groups, how can we bring the margins into the mainstream? You know, reflecting on the groups that you've taught, there will inevitably be kind of people that you can quite easily you kind of bring their names and their faces quite easily to mind. So it's very interesting to notice. I notice this when I'm in supervision, and I'm having supervision with my supervisor, and we're talking about the current group I'm teaching, and it's the people whose names I can't remember. So I'll know I've got however many, 13 or 10 or something in the group, and I can remember 8 of them. 2, I can't. Who else is in the group? I'm sure I can remember. And I really find them difficult to bring to mind. So that's quite interesting when that happens. The people who tend to fade into the edges of the group, who perhaps when we're doing an inquiry, you can see that they're kind of pulling back, and that's fine. There's no point at all in any way in exposing them. But can you just slightly up the levels of participation without exposing anyone? And how could we do that? Maybe it's just a little bit of eye contact. Maybe it's an encouraging smile when there's been a nod. Perhaps the horizontal inquiry, someone has nodded, and it's just like, yes, a nod, yeah. Maybe it's quite subtle. Maybe it's just a gentle kind of connecting, and maybe cultivating, as I say, these ways of hearing and acknowledging even small gestures. Remember, I said to you that in horizontal inquiry there might be just a, anyone else sleepy? Yes, there's it's sleepy. There's a way in which we can really hold the circle and cultivate these ways of hearing and acknowledging. So this is a very important question. How can we bring the margins gently into the mainstream? Really to be vigilant, and really to be aware of our margins, and really to be aware of people in the group who are on their own. So like the only man in the group, the only person of colour in the group, the only wheelchair user in the group, the only older person, I've recently taught a group, and there was one woman who came from a very different socioeconomic background to the others. How to include her. In fact, it was not a problem. But just to be aware of that, and just to find some very gentle ways of upping, and ideally getting a level of participation in the group it's not going to be equal, but that is as inclusive as possible. Yeah. So looking at our model again, this learning context, this reading, what is going on in the group, reading the body language, reading the development of the group. Where is it up to? What does it need? What do individuals in the group need? It's not either individuals or group. It's having some sense of how is she doing in the group? How is the group doing? It's almost, as I said to you at the beginning, it's like a different entity in the room that we're learning to relate to. So I thought I'd tell you a bit of a story at this point. It's not really a story, but it's just a sort of anecdote, I guess, of some people that I taught some time ago, and it was very noticeable that they were both very quiet. So they were just individuals, separate individuals, but I really noticed early on how quiet they were. And it surprised me because I'd actually had because they're a clinical group, I'd had a one-to-one orientation. So I'd actually spoken to them individually. And they both had, quite a lot to say. So on a one-to-one level, we were connecting, and they were connecting really in quite a full way. But then they got into the group and they were very quiet. Now, what they shared in the one-to-one orientation is quite significant levels of trauma. I didn't use that word, but they described stories that were clearly, in terms of their illness and what had happened to them and how it had impacted on them, they were clearly traumatized, fairly recently as well. what was so interesting to me was just to notice that as the group developed and kind of matured and went deeper, these two, you could see that there was like a sort of a cross connection. I don't remember them ever sitting next to each other, but they would often seek each other out in small groups. You'd often see them go into a pair together or a three together. And there was a way in which I remember in the day of practice that one of them wasn't there, and the other one reminded me that she wasn't there and made sure that I got her name up on the flip chart. There was just this real heart connection between them. Now, my guess is they've never met outside, or they had never met outside the group. My guess is that they didn't know each other's stories particularly. They might have done, but I would imagine not necessarily. But there is a way in which even something as significant as triggering trauma, it actually, because it's a shared vulnerability, it actually can be a form of connection across the group. I was very touched by that, actually. I was very touched by that. So I think it's time to stand up, and really inviting you to move and to stand, and to just perhaps shift these shoulders. I think the heart has been doing some work, some feeling in this last session. So perhaps moving the chest, moving the upper body, perhaps stretching out, doing whatever your body says, oh, I want to do this, I want to move in this way. And then really being in the movement as you make it, really being there to feel the movement. Yeah. And shaking is great. I mean, if you feel a bit stuck with stuff, or shaking can be. I'm working with a colleague of mine who calls shruggle. I quite like that, shruggle, or shriggle, or shruggle. So just noticing how that feels, and then maybe coming to a place of stillness. When you do that, noticing how the body is now and what you're noticing in the body. And if there's some part of the body that still wants to move, then really, really noticing how that is. I can see some of you still moving. My hands want to move. Yeah. Okay, so coming to sit again. We're coming to the last part of this session. Another breakout room coming up. And maybe just for a moment or two, some of you are taking notes, but maybe just for a moment or two, again, I just want to scroll through the screens and just see you. That's very nice. It's a bit like kids in a bus, isn't it? You sit on the back seat and you have a bit of a wave. Hello, they're going to wave back. It's nice. I love that. Yeah, lovely to see you. And if you have to leave at any point, it's just been great that you could make it. Just go and maybe catch up on the recording. It'll be fine. Okay, so I kind of amused myself really, because this last section is probably the very one that you'd like to learn most about. But actually we've been doing it as we've been going through. So this last section is leadership, holding the group. And I'm going to teach it in a slightly different way, I think. I'm going to teach it in a slightly different way. So I want to just also sort of land some questions with you about leadership, about holding the group. I think when I was thinking about how I was going to adapt this session to manage an online and quite a few people online, I realized that holding the group was probably the hardest one to teach. because so much of holding is visceral and sensory. You know, so much of it, I mean, it obviously to do with forming and all the other things we've been talking about, but so much of it is about the heart. So much of it is about the embodiment of the teacher. So much of it is about the kind of taking the group along with you during the 8 weeks that you're teaching them, or however long it is that you're teaching them for. Which is a big ask, isn't it? It's a big ask. But I find that, you know, if there's somebody in the group that I'm concerned about, or particularly if I don't feel I'm connecting with, those are the ones I feel concerned about. The people I don't really feel I've linked with yet. I don't really feel I've got a kind of line, a channel of connection with yet. And again, just remembering sort of early narratives, there could be all sorts of reasons for that. I don't take that personally. You know, I'm remembering the trailers. You know, we've got some significant trailers. Many of us, most of us, I think. But those are the ones that I'm concerned about, and they're the ones that I bring onto my cushion. So they're the ones I bring to my practice. Just not in any way to kind of try and find a solution, but just bring them to mind. I think that's very helpful. So the question is, what is needed to help every individual in the group to find their place of belonging? You know, what is needed? And remembering that practice is so helpful. I didn't mention when we were looking at practice in terms of forming the circle, but I just want to suggest to you that every time our participants practice, and they get the recording out during the 8-week course, every time they practice, they're kind of bringing the group with them. You know, they do the body scan after week 1, and it's kind of like they're laying down, they're kind of, oh yeah, we did this. Oh yeah, all those others that we did this with. So there's a way in which the group gets internalized, both during the course and I think afterwards. I know this for a fact, actually. Not everyone, but I think for those for whom mindfulness is landing significantly, I think it's a very important aspect. Yeah. So what is needed to help every individual in the group to find their place of belonging? And this is where I get quite emotional and quite touched, I think, by the potential of the group. You know, if somebody comes to one of our courses and they've never felt particularly that they belong, and then they come to the group and they do find a place of belonging. And that's huge. And they find a place of belonging to the practice and a place of belonging, even just for 8 weeks, to the group. What is needed to bring the group into a community of learning and safe relating? So it's almost back to that forming again. I mean, I think all that we looked at in the forming is tremendously important. It's so central. And also remembering that the group isn't static. It's always changing and developing. So the question that's very helpful to ask ourselves at the end of each session is, what does the group need now? I went through a patch, I think, in the early days of teaching, or in the middle days of teaching, where I would have a chart, and I would actually, at the end of each session, you know, when I was reflecting during the week, I would think about each one, each person, you know, how are they doing? How are they getting on? You know, And then I would always include the group. So how's the group doing? What does the group need now? Does it need more fun? Does it need more grounding? Does it need more structure? Does it need more love? That's a big word. So let's just come up with a screen that I came up with that speaks about holding the group. So holding the group, that in itself is interesting, isn't it? So grounded embodiment comes first. We'll come back to the inside-out triangle, but grounded embodiment is absolutely central. If you don't feel you're grounded enough, and if actually you want to really hold your group, that's what you really might invest in. I often say to myself, it probably took me 10 years to get grounded. But I think I was a bit slow with it, you know. And then listening to the circle. You know, that sounds like a funny thing to be doing. It's not just listening to the words, it's listening to the feel of the circle. It's listening to the movement of the circle as we're guiding. And it's also a metaphor, because it's also seeing the circle, scanning the circle, feeling into the circle. But listening is a lovely movement. When we really listen to a little sound, we almost kind of turn our we kind of move towards, and we almost turn the ear, just so we can catch the little sound. So I think, I think listening to the circle is also a metaphor for what we're doing in holding the group. Normalizing all experience, continuing to use the language of we. We do that, don't we? Yes, I know that. We know that. Normalizing, it's so important. Normalizing all experience. Brief practices. I mean, we've been doing brief practices during this session. I'm just such a fan of brief practices, and they're brief. They're a moment. They're a few seconds. They're perhaps extended into 10 seconds, maybe 3 breaths. Brief practices. Feet on the floor, pausing, coming to the breath. Standing in mountain, just some very brief ones. Playful humor is just so important. Don't let's be too serious about this. It's so much that we have to be serious about. I mean, I don't mean being flippant, but just bring some playfulness in. It takes a bit of confidence, and it won't be something that comes if you're just starting out to teach. It'll be a later development. But if you notice that you tend to be quite a serious sort of teacher, see if you can up that role as teacher, just being a little bit more playful, a little bit lighter. And then intention. I don't know if you can see it, because I know that probably your thumbnails, the little pictures will be in the way, but it says intentions in the service of. So what are you teaching in the service of? Why are you a teacher? What is it that really matters to you in terms of your teaching? And can you relate that back into holding the group? Into this. This isn't just about us doing a good job, although of course we want to, but this is in the service of common humanity, of actually stepping into the needs of ourselves and others. So supervision is massively important. It's interesting, I think, that I think Alison Evans would probably concur that actually quite a lot of supervision, and those of you who are supervisors, I would imagine that many people who you're supervising bring to you problems in the group. An individual in the group who's not quite working. The group is sort of, something to do with the group and how people are relating in the group, I think is often brought up into supervision. And rightly, that's important. And then the last one is bring the group onto your cushion. Bring the group onto your cushion. Yeah. Not just the individual, but the group itself. I have a game that we don't have time to play, but I'll share it with you because you might enjoy it. But it's a game really, or it's a little kind of ruse, it's a little device, if you like, where you can ask yourself, what is the group animal? What is the group animal? And some of you will remember this, but what is the group animal of the group now? So you might just sort of be thinking about a group that you're currently in. Maybe it's a training group, maybe it's an online group, maybe it's this group. But just be thinking about if this group was an animal, or if the group you're thinking about was an animal, what would it be? Yeah, what would it be? So I've thought about this in terms of I often use this with the people I supervise, and I often use it myself. And so, just to give you some examples, I remember somebody telling me that the group was a bit like a flock of little sparrows. I was all over the place. They were very excited, and they were very kind of friendly, but they were a bit all over the place, and they go from one place to another. That was an early group. And so the question is, well, what do those sparrows need to get a bit more grounded, to kind of grow slightly bigger bodies? What do they need? Well, they need grounding. They need settling. They need sort of bringing together. They need knowing what's coming next. And I think eventually, I can't remember what they turned into, but I think most groups that are really performing well, they seem to be always big cats. I seem to go to big cats, lions or tigers or, cheetahs or some of those gorgeous animals that really just move beautifully. So playing with this idea of group animal, and maybe, thinking a lot of people come up with the group, those meerkats that kind of turn up out of the ground and, like, ooh, and then they get back in again, Yes, yeah. And there's some groups that are kind of like, very sleepy pussycats, you know, oh, this is all lovely. Oh, you know, let's just stay lying here for a bit. You know, it's all. So what do they need? You know, what do they need to wake up a little bit? We're a centipede. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. A centipede with individual legs. That somebody just put that into chat. Teresa's just put that into chat. So just be playing with this. You know, when you're in a work group or you're having a meeting online or something, and it's a work colleagues, just don't share it with them, please, because they might get a bit offended. But just be thinking to yourself, you know, if this team was an animal, what would it be? You know, what would it be? And what does it need? You know, you're perhaps not necessarily leading the team. So I'm going to change around my program just slightly, Stefan, and I'm going to do what I've been longing to do, which you know about, don't you? But I don't know if my screen share is going to go so well. So if you just pause for a second, how am I going to do it? Right, okay, that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you something a little bit unusual. And I want you to look at this video, if you'd like to. And I want you to look at it as a metaphor for, you're going to see a conductor, a really very wonderful conductor called Claudio Abbado. So if we have any Italians in the group, do we have any Italians in the group? Speak now. Anybody from Italy in the group? It would be lovely if there was. Anyway, Claudio Abbado is, I'm looking for a thumbs up or anything, but I don't see one. But Claudio Abbado is, oh, Teresa is lovely. Welcome. Claudio Abbado is no longer alive, but he was a very famous conductor. He was a very particular conductor. So, Stefan, I noticed that my voice isn't in line. Is it okay? Yeah, all right. So he was a very particular conductor in that he didn't do a lot of talking with his orchestras. He worked with absolutely top orchestras. He didn't do a lot of stopping and talking with them. You're going to see a rehearsal of, I think, his first rehearsal with the Berlin Philharmonic, just 3 minutes of it. And I want you to look at him in terms of metaphor of teacher holding group, all the things that we've been talking about, and particularly a mindfulness group that's very early learning to kind of engage with some of the habits, some of the kind of ingrained habitual reactions to things. And I also want you to look at him a little bit like another metaphor, like a little bit like a midwife. He is midwifing the sound from the orchestra. There's more than 100 people in the orchestra, and they are all good enough to be all soloists in their own right. So my guess is they've all got pretty huge egos. You know, and you know, look at how he's managing to bring them together as a group, how he's managing to bring them so that they're making one sound. And I would invite you to notice how he encourages them to listen, and also be noticing how his right hand, which has the baton, is actually constructing structure, rhythm, tempo, things like that, some sort of basics in the music. And his left hand is inviting expression. Okay, so let's see what you make of this. So just noticing what you're all doing as we're making sense of technology here. So my computer is kind of saying too much, like it does, yeah? So I'm going to carry on with what we're going to do, and then at the next breakout room, what I'll do is I'll confer with Stefan, who's a bit of a magic man with this, and hopefully that we'll be able to sort it, because I'd love to show it to you, because I think it's quite important. So we're going to move into breakout rooms now. And guess what? I've got another Japanese poem for you. So here is your Japanese poem, and this one is by Ryokan. So just see if you can let this poem land with you. Don't say my hut has nothing to offer. Come, and I will share with you the cool breeze that fills my window. Don't say my hut has nothing to offer. Come and I will share with you the cool breeze that fills my window. So you're going to go into breakout rooms again, and the question is a familiar one for you. And the question is, what are you taking away? What are your next steps? So as we come towards the end of this workshop, what are you taking away? What are your next steps? And not too many, just maybe one or two. What are you taking away? Have we got everybody back? Yes, welcome back. And the best news is that Stefan has worked some magic, and he's got the video and the sound up, which I'm really thrilled about. So I don't think we're going to share. I think that your own kind of reflections, but really encouraging you to keep going with that. You know, that when you've been sort of chewing on the session and noticing what's sort of landing with you, then maybe you know, this evening or sometime during the week or something, you might just get your notebook out and just say, I'd like to try that next time with the group. Or I'd like to remember to always stand up when I'm setting up a small group process, you know? Just taking a few of these little nuggets out and seeing what happens, because each nugget probably represents a quite a big theme, like, you know, connecting in the group or sharing. But anyway, the best news is that Stefan has very cleverly, so we're yet going to be able to manage the video. So again, as I said to you before, just watching this video, Stefan, go for it, watching this video of this guy, Claudio Abbado, and just noticing how he's midwifing the orchestra. And look at his hands and look at how he's encouraging them to listen. Well, that thanks so much, Stefan. That wasn't perfect. You know, the film, the actual movement wasn't great, but I hope that you can kind of capture the way he was really aware of all the different sounds in the orchestra, and he was really kind of facilitating the different sounds as they came through. And if you were there were lots of clips of his on YouTube, but you'll watch that he's almost like pointing, listen now to the flute, you know, let's have a bit more of you here. And I find that very inspiring. I find it fabulous inspiring. So that was Mahler, actually, Nick, if that was Nick who said that it was Beethoven, but it was actually Mahler. Very dramatic. I can't remember which Mahler, but I think it was one of the Mahlers, yeah. So we're coming towards the end of our time together, and I've really enjoyed being with you, and I'm just hoping that perhaps this session has inspired you around groups, you know, and really just Stefan's putting the video link into the chat, so you can copy that if you'd like to, and then you could see it a little bit better. There is in fact the full documentary, so you can find that on YouTube as well. But I suppose I'm really hoping that this might have inspired you to give a little bit more attention to your groups, and just to be really working at the forming of them. I think if we can get the forming going, if we can remember those connecting, those small groups, those shifting around, those listening to the circle, then there's some chance that the group can really flower into whatever it's going to be, and we don't know what that's going to be. And it's not up to us. All we have to do, just like Abbado was saying, that as he conducted the orchestra more and more, he said in a part of that interview, I use the stick less, which is a nice metaphor. He meant the baton. I use the stick less because they know more how to do it themselves. So it becomes more subtle as the course goes on. It's just needs a more subtle touch. Yeah. So let's just finish with a practice and a settling in, and a big thank you from me. You know, big thank you from me for your attention, for your engagement, for your breakout rooms. I hope they've been rich for you. And I'm not sure how we're going to share the Japanese poems, but perhaps we can get them up onto the Friends of Bangor website, and I can pass them through. Yeah. So with your eyes open, if you'd like to, just seeing all the faces, all the colours. And yeah, we'll keep. If you could take off the mute, please, Stefan. And as we finish up, thank you so much for all your messages. And let's just say goodbye. And I wish you well.
Thank you.
Have fun with your group.
Thank you, Trish. Fantastic.
Thank you, Trish.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Trish.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take very good care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.